Good afternoon, or should I say midday? Good midday. Welcome to all of you to the Asia Summit and to our session on how to live to an active 100. I just want to make sure, by the way, that everyone is in the right room. Can I just see a show of hands? Who in this room is getting older? Okay, good. You must be in the right place. So we're going to have an interesting conversation today. Now you may be a bit surprised that a session that's called How to Live to an Active 100 does not have one physician on stage, but maybe it makes the point that all of us have an opportunity to invest in the possibility of longer lives. So just before I introduce our distinguished panel, just a couple things to think about for those of you who may not have been in the session with Mike Milken yesterday, but Mike showed some slides and some data that we focus a lot on at the Milken Institute. The notion that the number of people 60 plus in the world is going to double by mid-century to about 2.1 billion, and the majority of those people, by the way, will be where we are sitting now in Asia. So Asia is very much not only the canary in the coal mine in many ways, but Asia is on point in reinventing, reimagining, redeveloping policies and practices and procedures and thinking about how we all age. So what an apropos place for our conversation today. So let me introduce the folks on our panel, each one from a very different place. Ofer Tzedek is the co-founder of Taito Care, a really innovative company involved in the medical products business, the medical devices business, and he's going to talk a little bit about this very inventive know-how that they have developed and are implementing. Next to him is my pal Catherine Collinson, who is the president of the Transamerica Institute, and I always forget, she's got the world's longest and fanciest title, but she's in effect the leader of Aegon's aging and longevity research work across the world. To my left, to your right, is Jim Mellon. Jim is an investor and an entrepreneur and the chairman of Burn Bray. And by the way, I also just want a mini plug for Jim's new book, Juvenescence, which I recommend. I think actually we have it at the bookstore, and Jim is really one of the leading thinkers in the world these days on investing in innovations around aging. And to Jim's left is Wolf Blackburn. Wolf is the president of Pru Singapore, and there's certainly no industry that's more on the spot than the life business. As we think not so much about the risks of death, but the risk of too much life. And Wolf is going to talk a little bit about that. So before we kind of get into our conversation, I just want to ask each one of you, maybe for just 2 or 3 minutes, about why you care. Why should you be as interested as you are in this notion, not just of changing population composition, much older populations across Asia and the world, but the risks and opportunities of increasing longevity. Wolf, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, well, first, Prudential's life assurance company originated in the UK, predominantly focused on Asia, where we have obviously fast-growing population and fast-aging population. We're in the business of managing risk, and has been indicated that the biggest risk for many people nowadays is that they live for too long, and they live beyond their financial means, and to a certain extent that they live in an unhealthy way. So our business really exists to help people to live well, and it's shifted very much over time from being a business that we collect premiums, then when people are sick we give them some money, rather now towards helping people to prevent illnesses, to detect early, to take treatment early so that they can live a long time. So we're very interested in not only people living a long time and managing that, but living well.
No industry with interests more aligned with the notion of healthy longevity than the life insurance business.
Yeah, absolutely.
Delayed payment is a good thing.
Well, it's better for everybody if they if they can have healthy lives, then the cost of their insurance becomes lower. But more importantly, they're not dealing with illness. So we've got very strong incentive to work with many organizations who can help our customers to live healthier lives, and to talk about that later on. Yeah.
Good. So Jim Mellon, you've invested in lots of things in your life. You have traveled and dabbled and focused and refocused in many, many ways. But for some reason, a couple years ago, you got incredibly interested in these questions around aging and longevity. What were the prospects of our longer lives? What was driving the increase in longevity? What the potential was? And you have refocused your investment activity around that. Talk a little bit about how that happened.
Oh, thanks, Paul. Well, there is no bandwagon on which I'm not prepared to jump, because I've never had an original idea in my life. But I'm a pretty competent plagiarist, and I've been in the biotech business for about 10 years, and this longevity science is catching up with the aspiration that most of us have for an ultra-long life, and it's a super exciting time to be alive. We're the first cohort on the planet for which biological manipulation is possible. All gains in life expectancy up to this point in the developed world and the developing world have come from changes in the environment, but we're now at the point where biological intervention is going to be possible. I just want to make one very brief point. In Singapore, you have approximately 1,200 centenarians. That figure is dramatically increased, although the records aren't great going back for 100 years. In the UK, the King of England, as he then was, not the Queen, in 1917, so just 101 years ago, sent out 24 telegrams, the first time that telegrams were sent out to people over 100 years old. Today, the Queen has given, and she's going to be a centenarian herself, as indeed hopefully will her husband be. The Queen of England doesn't send out telegrams, but she sends out letters, and at the moment there are about 18,000 centenaries in the UK, up from 24 in 1917, and that basically shows you the trajectory of the aging population, all around the developed world.
Yeah, and I think last night Mike Milken, I think it was at dinner, showed a slide, very similar kind of issue in Japan, where of course beautiful plates were given to centenarians a generation ago, and now those plates have become unaffordable for the government, as the number of centenarians in Japan has just exploded. So Catherine, you, in addition to kind of looking at global demography, you really study this question of changing work norms, changing expectations. We're going to talk a little bit about the connection between work and health, but give us a little bit of a sense of some of the things that you're seeing as you look across the globe.
Well, I've been doing retirement research for a couple of decades now, and all of the assumptions are changing, and yet societally, we are just not prepared for them. And I think it's no secret, most people aren't saving enough for a financially secure retirement, and they're still thinking in terms of, or at least employer assumptions and benefit assumptions, that we work to 65 and expire at 85, and that's just not the case anymore. And people want and need to extend their working lives, but there are not yet pathways available for them to do that. And it's everybody's problem if we have a large aging population that hasn't saved enough and doesn't have the financial resources to age well.
So surprising. So we have workforce shortages in many parts of the world, by the way, very much including Asia, people having an aspiration to work longer, the opportunities not existing in many ways for that to happen, and that not just being an issue for wealth, but very much being an issue for health as well. And speaking of health, so Ofer, I know that you've been involved in a variety of entrepreneurial businesses in your life, information tech and various other things. How did you get interested, you and your partner get interested in this as an idea, the development of a device that in many ways could displace the office visit?
Yes, Titor started with a vision to replicate the clinic visit. Nowadays, all of us are busy, either with kids or with parents. The parents live longer, which is nice, but you need to take care of them. And doing it is not easy. And we all know the cumbersome of bringing the patient or the father to the clinic or to the ER, where can they get germs and they come for one disease and they can get out with another. So we want to keep the people at home, do everything that we're doing in clinic or in hospital, do it at home. It reduces cost for everybody. The insurance companies are here, so I'm sure that they will be benefit out of that. And that's where we are. And later on, I will present the solution itself, but it will be part of the best of breed technology to keep people at home and to keep them at home healthy.
So let me go back to Wilf now for a second. So you've kind of opened the door to this notion of life insurers playing a different role in people's lives, encouraging healthy aging, healthy longevity, a variety of kind of changed behaviors. Give us some specific examples of how that's happening. I mean, what are you now? You weighing your customers weekly, or you monitoring their meals?
Yeah.
What's happening?
Kind of. I'll share a couple of examples. We have an insurance plan for employers to protect their staff, and historically it was just a standard plan. You pay premiums. If your employees are sick, we give some money. And now we've got some other services that come with that, where we have a screening facility for the employees. So some devices where they can get advice on their health. They can have their health, their body size monitored, etc. So they get regular information, and they also have access to finding the nearest doctors through some of the tools we've added, so they can talk on screen to the doctors. So it's gone beyond a product to something that's very attractive to employers, because they want their staff to stay healthy, and attractive to employees. Likewise, at individual level, we've just partnered with Babylon from the UK, where across Asia we'll be having, again, these some of the med tech solutions that help people to be able to, not to diagnose themselves, but to find out what kind of questions they might need to ask the doctor, which kind of doctor they might want to talk to, where they can then make sure they're using the time with the doctor effectively. They can get second opinions, and likewise they can find the nearest doctors, and even then get the prescriptions brought to their homes. So these are attractive to our customers, and also attractive to us, because of course it means if our customers are healthier, then we have fewer claims. Ultimately, they have lower premiums, and then the product itself. Here in Singapore, many Singaporeans covered for their medical expenses by Prudential's Shield plan, and last year we introduced claim-based pricing, where if people don't make big claims, then they get discounts on their premium. So directly the product itself, they have the opportunity to, if they adapt their lifestyles to be more healthy, then they get direct benefit from that.
This is at the individual client.
And this is at the
individual client level.
At the individual client level. So around 85% of our customers get a 20% discount on their medical insurance, because they're moderating the consumption. They'll go to the pharmacy if that's all they really need to do, rather than see the doctor.
So I'm interested, just because it's instructive, and this is again kind of a non-medical interventions that actually drive down cost, presumably are based on research suggesting that these people are less likely to make claims early, et cetera. So give us examples. I mean, I'm sitting here wearing a Fitbit. Do you put Fitbits on your customers? Do you prescribe diet, exercise, smoking habits, things like that? Give us some very specific examples.
I'll give an example. Something that we give our customers around Asia, it's a diagnostic tool called MyDNA. We partnered with a medtech company, and customers can, with a saliva sample, they can get a report that tells them what their unique DNA is. Obviously not a medical test, but it tells them what their unique DNA is, and based on that, which kind of illnesses they might be particularly susceptible to. So it might be you're particularly vulnerable to liver problems, so eat more kale. And this very, very practical. And what we find is, if general advice people don't respond to, but if it's based on their specific situation, they will. And of course, our customers benefit from living healthier, and of course, in the end, we benefit from lower claims and being able to bring down the cost of insurance.
So I just have to ask, in the wake of, and obviously Jim referred to it, but in the wake of the decoding of the human genome, we know so much, and so there's the know-how in Asia, and of course we have things like 23andMe, et cetera, in the United States and growing. Are we going to get to the point where insurance pricing is so individuated based on one's own genetic makeup characteristics, et cetera? And how do you feel about that? I mean, it's a radical change in the business, and in a sense, putting actuaries out of business, right? You no longer have to look at things at a population level. You look at them individually.
Yeah, I mean, our business is about pricing risk based on symmetry of information. The more information there is available, the better it is the more possible it is to price the risk more accurately. But at the same time, we recognize, of course, that our business is based on pooling of risks across the population. And I think it's, well, as a former actuary, I think it makes the actuarial work more interesting rather than displacing it.
Okay, good. So Jim, speaking of the Human Genome Project, I know you're really interested in the notion of investment potential associated with really radical kind of radical shifts in understanding about human biology, et cetera. Talk a little bit about some of the things that you're seeing in your travels as you go, as a non-scientist, but as you go, from lab to lab and country to country.
Okay, well, thanks, Paul. Can I call up slide number 5? I'm going to give you some historical perspective very briefly. Although it says the book Juvenescence was published in 2012, it's actually late 2017, so just less than a year ago. But the first book that I wrote, and this is not a plug for books since there's no money in books, was in 2012. It was called Cracking the Code. Since that book was published, artificial intelligence, which we're using to discover novel compounds, is now being used, and some companies like Benevolent in the UK have grown to be substantial. That did not exist in 2012. The cure for hepatitis C did not exist in 2012, and as you know, Gilead made tons of money in the last few years from selling a cure for hepatitis C. Cancer immunotherapy, which is fast becoming the gold standard in the treatment of cancer, and particularly blood cancers and ultimately solid tumors, did not exist in 2012, and next year will be a $100 billion a year business. And CRISPR-Cas9, which everyone in this room is familiar with, which is the gene editing system that is going to revolutionize medicine and indeed will ultimately help to extend human life, although it's not there yet for that purpose, did not exist. So that's all happened in 6 years. So my point is we don't know what's going to happen in the next 6 years. We're taking some educated bets on that. But what I would say, it's going to be good, and the science is accelerating. So we're super excited. One thing I want to take issue with Wilf on is that these SNP tests, these small genome tests, in my opinion, are not effective. And very soon, $100 full sequence genomes will be available, and every single person in this room should have their genome fully sequenced. Because if you do 2 or 3 23andMe tests, you're just going to get completely different results. So get your whole genome sequenced, and I'm sure you're moving down that path as well.
Yes. By the way, I had mine sequenced at, I have a relationship with the University of Southern California, and the guy who's our dean, who's a geneticist, took a look at my stuff, and he said, I've got some bad news for you. And I said, what is it? And he said, well, you're almost certain to suffer from male pattern baldness. And here I am. We're very much covering the waterfront on this panel today. But so Catherine, back to this question of work. And by the way, Jim, in addition to a whole series of interesting medical interventions, what we know is public health interventions, which need to be democratized, healthy nutrition, eating, exercise, and things like that. All the things that our friend Dan Buettner talks about in Blue Zones. If you haven't read the book, I'd recommend it. Are things contributing to longer and better lives? But we do have this work problem, right? So we have this seeming disconnect between where we are today, by the way, very much true in Asia, although retirement ages are kind of gently creeping up, certainly in Japan, the oldest super age society in the world, but what are you seeing in the progress of your work? Are retirement norms changing? Are people able to work longer? Do they want to work longer?
Well, let me share a
Yeah,
little bit of our
please.
research. So slide number 1, please. Through Aegon Center for Longevity and Retirement, we do an annual global retirement survey, 16,000 respondents across 15 countries. And I want to share with you a couple of the results that help illustrate this point. So oftentimes we think of retirement as a single point in time where we're working full blast and then we immediately stop working and presumably enter a life of leisure. Well, looking at our survey responses around the world, and we have the Asian countries, as you can see, China, Japan, India, and the other countries in the survey, only about 3 in 10 actually envision retirement as a fixed point in time. Most envision a transition, shifting from full-time to part-time, working in a different capacity, maybe doing something different, but very few have actually envisioned the retirement working this way. As part of the survey, we also talked to retirees, and most of them actually find themselves not working either due to health issues or employment issues. But I want to take the idea a step further, and that's the next slide, please. So we asked people about their important retirement aspirations. So this is sort of the equivalent of asking them, how do you dream of spending your retirement? And of course, the top choices are traveling, spending time with family and friends, and hobbies. But around the world, approximately 1 in 4 cite work as an important retirement aspiration, something they want to do in retirement, either paid work or volunteer work. Of course, now we have the big disconnect, and that is what opportunities are available for them. We inquired about employment practices, and very few employers have any sort of phased retirement programs in place or programs to help their older workforce create pathways for them onto their next chapter. It's a tremendous disconnect, and we look at labor force participation rates around the world, and we see that most are actually dropping out of the labor force long before their years. And when we talk about the 100-year life, we have to remember it's kind of impossible to self-fund or meaningfully fund what could be a 35, 40-year retirement with a 30-year working career.
Plus the loss of human capital, the loss of knowledge, experience, et cetera. So I'm just curious in this audience, so how many of you aspire, be honest, how many of you aspire to traditional retirement? In other words, a retirement in which you see yourself engaging basically only leisure type activities, not working. Show of hands, how many? So how many would aspire either to continued full-time work or part-time work, but something that absolutely involves work? Everyone. You know, so this, I mean, now this is certainly not a general audience. On the one hand, this is not an audience involved, for example, in physical labor, but it does say something about changing norms. And is that changing now over the years? Are we seeing more and more people aspiring to longer and longer work lives?
Yes, we do. And in part, we see people are concerned about savings shortfalls, especially in the US, where I'm from. People worried that they haven't saved enough, and working longer and extending your working life is a logical solution. But we also, in our survey work, as we delve into the question around the world, we see almost as many people cite what we call healthy aging-related reasons for wanting to work. Keeping our brains alert, staying active, involved, we enjoy what we do, maintaining social connections, problem solving. All of this can be good for our aging. And as you pointed out, there's this tremendous human capital.
And by the way, if you look at some of, I won't go into the data now, but if you look at some of the Milken Institute research and reporting on this, one of the things that you'll see is the connection between things like work, purpose, meaning, self-defined, self-image in aging, and reduction of things like cardiovascular risk, deferral of Alzheimer's symptoms and other dementias, et cetera. So the implications are not just soft. I mean, this is serious financial need on the one hand, serious potential health implications on the other. So changing these norms in ways that are productive and that align employer needs with the aspirations of workers is something that we all have to be working on.
Yeah.
Ofer, as far as I can see, we have at least 3 potential investors on stage for devices like yours. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it and why they should be interested? We have 2 folks related to the insurance industry and 1 prominent investor. Why should they all be jumping across stage right now to
I'll do my best. Slide 13, please. Okay, the aging population faces challenges in regard to health. If you look at that, they are high users of the health system. They spend more time as a working adult, and many seniors live alone. And one important statistic is that in the US, at least 81% of people above 65 has multiple chronic conditions. So we're not talking about healthy people, we're talking about 80% of them has chronic condition. If you look at that in Hong Kong, 62% has at least 1 chronic condition. So we are not just doing acute care, we are looking also on chronic condition. So the solution for this ecosystem is to keep them at home. It should be home-based digital health, and we are doing it with monitoring, with on-demand medical consult, prescription reminders, and of course, artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. So what we see currently in this environment, what are the home-based health technology? We do see fall detection, which is becoming very important. We see a motion detector to see that they are active. Caregivers, like the family, would like to know that they are moving from one room to another and not staying all day at bed to make them more active. There is a medical alert if they have urgency. We have wearable monitors. Probably you heard about the Apple Watch 4. Apple Watch 4 is a wearable, but it's not a medical device, but it can give you data. It can give you much data. The question later on, what to do with all this data. And then you have the pill alert. This is coming. The medication adherence is very important to keep the people healthy. And when it's required, you have the telehealth visit. And back to the insurance, currently we do see in order to reduce the premium of the insurance company is providing telehealth solutions. So it means before you go to a clinic, you call the telehealth provider. Just by that, you reduce your premium by 20 to 25%. So we do see things like that going everywhere, not just for the aging. Next slide, please. So Taito is part of this digital health. And what Taito is bringing is, as I said, to replicate the clinic visit. You probably, in the last 2 years, 3 years, either you or your family members went to a general practitioner or to a pediatric, and they checked the regular examination, which means your heart and lung sound, they look at your throat, they look at your ear, and they make diagnostics. So far, this kind of examination was done only by physicians, or maybe some nurse practitioners in the US. So what we are bringing to the table is a way to extend the hand of the physician to check the people at home. Next slide. So what we have is a device and a platform that enable physician to do remote examination online or offline using a device. This is a consumer device that you can check with that, as I said, imaging of the throat, skin, and eye. You have an otoscope to check your ear. You have a digital stethoscope for the heart and lung sound. And this is just an add-on. The analogy is a SLR camera that you replace the lenses. In our case, you will have one device at home, which means better user experience, not too many devices, but adding more and more examination just by add-on. This is our vision. So if you look at that, we're addressing the most common primary care condition for acute care and for chronic, where we have people with COPD and asthma, and that's what we provide, a full suite of examination. Next slide, please. So you see a Tyto-Home exam kit, as I said, is a consumer. It's very important that we'll have all the sensors, but the sensors are not the only thing. The challenge is how to make people without medical skills. I'm sure that many of you are not a physician. How do you see eardrum? How does it look? You need to make sure that the physician at a remote location will have the right data in order to do the diagnostic. So that's where we provide the guiding and navigation. Next slide, please. And let's see a movie, short movie, how eardrum is being done by a non-medical guy. So you have an application that shows you what to do, how to check, and then you have a navigation. The arrow says where to go in the ear, and when it gets to the eardrum, it recognizes it. So we implemented algorithm here to make sure that we get to the eardrum and the physician can see this. The right side for the throat. Again, a short movie that says what to look, where the tonsils are. And then we see the tonsils, everything is okay. Then this recording is being uploaded to the cloud where the physician can look at that. And it's not just for doing diagnostic at that time, but it can go for trends, it can go for a second opinion. So what we are trying to do, and this is all the digital health environment, is to enable non-medical people to perform examination at home, send it to the physician for the diagnostics.
Thank you. That's fascinating. And look, in a sense, as I said to Ofer earlier today, Tyto is a metaphor for the unbelievable range of opportunities that exist in digital health, and frankly, in a whole other series of opportunities. And Jim, I'm interested in that regard. So one of the things that kind of always drives me crazy is why aren't more people focused on this massive and growing population of older adults across the world who obviously are the principal consumers, for example, of health devices and the pharmaceuticals and all the rest. Why aren't more investors talking about this and excited about it?
Well, they are beginning to, and I think it's largely due to the fact that nothing worked until recently, and that pharmaceutical companies and other medical companies were focused on the diseases of aging as opposed to the disease of aging, if you know what I mean. And in particular, the 5 key things that would have killed us had we not lived in this wonderfully exciting time, and kill most people on the planet today. So there's 140,000 people a day who die on the planet, and 70% of them die of one of the 5 diseases, the most notable of which are cardiovascular disease, and then followed by cancer, which I talked about a little bit earlier, and then respiratory disease. Those are the 3 things that kill most people on the planet. All of those are being addressed very rapidly. But excitingly, coming along the rails is the opportunity that we have, as I said earlier, to biologically manipulate our bodies into a longer health span, which means living robustly for a longer period of time. And I think we should get rid of this idea of a 100-year life, because even though we're very good friends with Andrew Scott, the life that people can expect to live is now 110 to 120, and within 20 or 30 years, which is why it's very important to do the obvious stuff now to stay alive until the technology comes to full fruition. But I just want to show you one very quick slide. This is my last slide. Slide 7, please. I call it the mouse shot, because this demonstrates, and by the way, these type of small molecules, which is the first line in the armatorium against dying in your 80s and 90s, which most people do if they get into their 60s. Small molecules are the first line, but of course, after small molecules, you've got things like stem cells and gene therapy that are terribly exciting. But this is a small molecule, and this small molecule is now about to get into human trials, and I've got no doubt that it's going to work in the indication that it's being used for, which is osteoarthritis. On the left-hand side are mice who were treated in middle age with a senolytic drug. A senolytic drug removes senescent cells. Senescent cells cause a large burden of the inflammation in elderly people, the frailty, the osteoarthritis, and things like that. And these, the one on the left of the two mice there has not been treated. The one on the right has been treated. They're both approximately 95 years old in human terms. One's got all the diseases of aging that we're familiar with. Can't see, can't walk very well, thinning fur, cancer, blah, blah, blah. It's not a very happy mouse. And in fact, there are no happy laboratory mice because they live in plastic boxes. But the one on the right lives 35% longer and has a dramatic extension of health span. So that's mice that are treated in middle age. If you look on the right-hand side, you've got mice that are treated in old age. And even for the oldest people on this planet, there is the potential for drugs and subsequent treatments to reverse, halt, slow the process of aging, because we are not destined to die. Aging is multifactorial. There are a number of pathways that can be interfered with. And in the case of this mouse, this is one mouse, he or she has gone from being in a pretty diabolical state to being in a less diabolical, not ideal state, but in a much better state as a result of one single treatment with a senolytic drug. But that senolytic drugs are just one element of the panoply of stuff that's coming along. So I say the reason why people have not been investing in this area is because the science did not exist. We are in the internet 1995 of what will become, in my opinion, the biggest industry on the planet, which is taking every single person on the planet and adding 10, 15, 20, and subsequently 30 years to their healthy lifespan, and we're just at the beginning of that, and it's happening now.
So let me throw a curveball at all of you and push back a bit. In the United States, we have communities where people live on average, based on their zip code, 20 years difference. So we talk in the U.S. Regularly these days about income inequality, but longevity inequality may be even a more dramatic distinction and disparity. So whether it's creative insurance policies or innovative science or the prospect and the potential for interesting digital health tools, we have a massive number of older people across the planet who just don't have access. Who don't have wealth, who don't have health and financial literacy. How do we make sure that all these incredibly cool things that we have the potential to do, the advances in science, the prospects for new work lives, the potential for digital tools, how do we make sure that they're more broadly available? What policy prescriptions? Maybe, Wilf, you start. I mean, Singapore is about as advanced as it gets in this. It doesn't have all the answers, but there's certainly a lot of conversation about it. So
yeah, I mean, Singapore is not typical of Asia as we know, but we're finding that, the cost is coming down for a start of the devices, the apps, but I think particularly now with so much being mobile, so much we can do remotely, I think the treatment, the self-diagnosis, it's much more accessible. You no longer need to be able to travel to see a doctor, but so much can be done remotely. So that's the most important thing we see. Some of the applications that we're investing in, there are some markets in which we able to charge essentially for the service, but there are other places where it makes sense for us as a form of community investment to reach out. I mentioned Babylon earlier. There's some places in Asia where we make that available free to the entire population because we realize it's simply going to be unaffordable. But the critical point, I think, is the costs coming down. As mentioned, the technology is working. There are more and more businesses such as offers out there. It's becoming more competitive. Potential. We now have people, it's unimaginable, whose whole job is coming to conferences like this, connect to try and find folks like Offer so that we can bring the ideas back inside. Just more people working on it. That more innovations. Yeah,
Offer. Just remember when Wilf invests in your business and you make your first billion, that you need to become a sponsor of the Milken Institute, Center for the Future of Aging. Offer, you had a comment?
Yeah, I would like to say the digital health, we're talking about the technology. The digital health is a young industry, okay? It's not, we were talking about telemedicine for the last 15 years, and I remember recalling a survey by Philips saying why all this technology didn't get to the homes. So probably part of it is because of broadband and mobile that didn't exist back then. And people who are chronic are against tagging themselves as chronic, so they didn't want it to be on them. But what we've seen so far is that this industry is getting more and more mature. But what's interesting in the challenge, what would be the business model of using this technology? So you have many applications on the web, on the Google Play, on the App Store, but what comes out of it? This is what's important.
Business model meaning who's going to pay?
Who is going to pay? Who is going to see the benefits out of that?
Yep.
And I can tell you that we've done for example, few clinical studies that showing, not for the aging, in that case we took kids with medical complexities to bring them to the home. It needs special ambulance, it needs special clinic and all that, and we took two groups, one with Taito and the other sensors, and we took a group without it. It was done in Advocate in Chicago, Advocate Health System in Chicago, so it was not our research, it was their research. So they showed massive cost reduction. Because of the cost of these kits, they showed $7,000 expense reduction in 4 months versus the other group. So it means that everybody in this ecosystem should embrace it and should try and do researches, try to do studies, everything to show, because we can show ROI very soon.
Right, and so to respond to my earlier question about the democratization of these kinds of devices, what it means on payment is it has to be government, or it has to be employers, or it has to be insurers.
Yeah, but employers are somehow being driven by the insurance company, because the insurance company comes with a plan. It should include telehealth, it should include technology, it should include all these technologies to make this better. So we need to work together to bring this best of breed technology.
So Jim, I'm going to come back to you on this question too, but I want to get Catherine's reaction too. So I can imagine, again, you saw the response from this audience. This is a group that wants to continue to work in some kind of way, maybe full-time, maybe part-time, maybe in some kind of creative structure, maybe on some kind of advisory basis. For mere mortals, for most people across society who may not be in the kinds of jobs that accommodate those things, are employers getting it? And are they embedding, are you seeing that your research is being manifested in ways that create these ongoing opportunities for not just folks in white-collar jobs and in kind of knowledge-based jobs, but more broadly?
We're seeing the early beginnings of it, and one thing I think it came up before, workplace wellness is something that we're seeing, more and more workplace wellness programs, because healthy employees are also more productive employees. Another thing we're starting to see is employers focusing on their caregiving employees. So I'm going to ask everybody in the room, how many of you have been called upon to be some sort of caregiver for an aging parent or loved one? Okay, how many of you expect that you may be called upon to be a caregiver for an aging parent or loved one? It's something that impacts just about all of us. And I can share from my own caregiving experience, something like the technology that you've created is a godsend, because I was caring for my grandmother, to take her to the doctor's appointment, which was my responsibility, that was a day off work or a half day off work, and I'd have to find a way to work around that. And by the way, she hated going to the doctor. It is something that can positively impact all of our lives, and it's also really good for employers because it can help their employees better balance both their work and their family responsibilities.
So Jim, back to you, because you're the one who provoked the question. So I can imagine a world in which those who are educated, elite, have access to resources and connections and relationships could be living much, much longer lives. This is just kind of in response to your projection about the potential longevity. And I can also imagine a large number of people being left behind. So,
well, it's already happening, isn't
yeah,
it?
I mean, sure is.
You know, in Glasgow, I was just at Glasgow University last week, in the same, in 12-kilometer radius, there's a 25-year gap between male life expectancy, which is incredible.
Yep.
And the principal reason for that is diet. It's not smoking, fighting in the pubs at night, or you know, drinking a lot. It's the diet, and particularly red processed meat. That's what the people at Glasgow University have identified as the principal reason for the gap, and a lot of that is to do with education. But let me just answer this. People who were around in the 1980s will remember that your mother or your father or whatever might have said to you, you could worry your way into an early grave with an ulcer. Now, does anyone ever hear about ulcers anymore? And the answer is no, because we take proton pump inhibitors like Zantac or omeprazole, which are priced like sweeties in the pharmacy. But in the 1980s, when those drugs came out, they were very, very expensive. And the great news for us is we live long lives, and drugs normally have a 10-year exploitable commercial window. And at the end of 10 years, they become generic. And there is a generic drug out there called metformin, which many people in the longevity industry, Anthony Chow and myself included, take on a daily basis, because observationally, it will add between 4 and 8 years to your life. And it's generic, and it costs about 1 cent a pill, and if you get a friendly doctor to prescribe it, you can take it every day with very few side effects. And it's the first anti-aging drug. It's been around since 1957. That is accessible to everyone.
It's a diabetes drug.
It's a frontline diabetic drug, glucophage. So my point is that all this stuff will become available to everyone within the next 30 or 40 years. It will just become part of our lives, and it will become available to the poorest people. What will remain expensive are personalized gene therapies, personalized stem cell therapies, in the same way as cancer immunotherapy remains very expensive. And there's not much I can do about that, but the panoply of small molecule drugs and some biologic drugs will be very, very cheap and available to everyone, which is the good news.
So let's shift to policy for a second, because we know we need more capital, we need more creativity, we need more people involved and aware of both the challenges and the opportunities of aging and longevity, the great potential, and I think we've gotten some examples of that. But what should governments be doing to stimulate investment, to ensure access to successful interventions, et cetera? Wilf?
Yeah, well, one of the great things that the government did here in Singapore, the financial services regulator, the MAS, they've done something which most regulators wouldn't do, and they've stimulated this environment through creating the FinTech Festival. And that's become now a global forum in Singapore for bringing the FinTech companies together, bringing the insurance companies in, and through events such as this that we sponsor, we get to meet with many of the startups. We get to be able to catch the ideas, invest in the companies, provide support as required, and grab the solutions, bring the benefit to our customers. So I think many other governments could take note from the extremely enlightened approach that the Singapore government's doing, not providing only the regulation, but also providing the stimulus for every stakeholder in this to work together.
And just out of curiosity, because you raised it, as you've been around these fairs and festivals and observed these early stage businesses, can you identify one or two? You don't have to name names, but just ideas that you think may change the world.
Yeah, I mean, a couple of years ago, we were very much focused on the front end of the business. So we talk about fintech, and we're looking for ways to do more business or to help doing business. So clever companies that were investing in things that would help us with anti-money laundering, etc. Now it's shifted very much to med tech and health tech, and the kind of devices that we're talking about today. Really things that will help people to live longer and healthier lives are the The one I mentioned earlier, Babylon from the UK, were to a certain extent displacing or making more efficient the NHS. That one's that's one of our favorites right now.
So
in regard to the government, and not all people, Africa and Asia can afford Taito home or afford this solution at home. So the government in these areas needs to improve the delivery and the access to health. And we do see this that we use the same Taito home to be in villages, in schools, in a remote location where there is no physician there. So we are bringing the physician not to the home, but to the village. So in the village, you don't need to bring medical staff. You need to bring someone who can use the technology to deliver the results or the reading to the physician. And that's what we are now doing also, because in Africa, I don't see us selling Taito home, but we do have work with other groups there to bring it to the villages. And that's what we are looking to do in other locations. For example, in India, Apollo Health has 60,000 remote locations, and you need many more. And using technology, you can get access to this kind of people that cannot afford Taito home. So this is where the government should take a step forward and subsidize and move it further.
So we can imagine in India or sub-Saharan Africa, a village elder who is the esteemed and respected member of the village, who now hosts members of his village in his home or her home, and the results are now broadcast to a physician, an ENT doc in New York City or London or Tokyo.
Yeah, you close the distance.
Yeah, it's a great notion, a great vision. Catherine, what about you? So when you think about these things, a lot of these policies are government driven. I mean, are policy driven. The notion of kind of the expectations about retirement, when pension schemes are triggered and the like. In order to get to where I know you want to get to, which is a world in which people have a choice to live longer work lives, to be able to work in new and interesting ways and with kind of more creativity and flexibility and openness. What should governments, and I realize governments are so different. One prescription is not going to work in Vietnam and work in Canada, but just general thoughts on that. What should government leaders be thinking about?
Well, one of the things that we've seen in the research that is so interesting is how public policy creates a mindset. And we asked people about retirement age around the world. And sure enough, they came back with the retirement ages in their country. Even though they're planning to work beyond that retirement age and potentially work as long as possible, ask them the retirement age. It's not something that's for them. It's tied to public policy. Yeah. So how do we update public policy to help people update the thinking around it? And especially Social Security systems or those type of pay-as-you-go retirement systems, which are common throughout the world, they're all undergoing strain because people are living longer, the population's aging, and there are fewer working age people paying into the system. Inevitably, what's going to happen is more of the responsibility is placed on the individual. And people need time to adjust their plans. So that is another public policy thing. You can't just go raise the retirement age or the benefits eligibility because people don't have employment opportunities. Then they'll be unemployed waiting for benefits. But to create pathways, and if we've heard anything in this conversation is the big new assumption is that we have to assume that the assumptions are going to change, and to create policies that are fluid that can adapt with the changing times. If it's Social Security, if it's our working lives, access to healthcare, to be ready and nimble to adapt to new technology and new reality.
Average lifespan in the United States at the time Social Security was enacted in 1934-35 was 61.7 years. So now 20 years older. Several of us wouldn't be here on stage, or at least me. Everything is going to change. I say that, often say that longevity will change everything. So we have just a couple minutes left. I always see these kinds of sessions as an opportunity for a call to action. And each one of you is in your own way ensconced in this world of population aging and increasing longevity, changing global demography and longer lives. What's your ask? Oprah, let's start with you. What's your ask to this audience? And I don't mean to invest in your D round.
Taito is enabler to make things better for the population in regards to health. And what we are looking is that the government and health insurance company and the private sectors will move forward with that and take initiative to say, let's do it. Currently, the make it happen, it sits on us, on the technology drivers, but we need the counterpart. We need them to take it from here and help us, help their people, their population to live better. Because aging, we get to the age of 100, but what's important, how do you live until you are 100? And this is something that should be driven by others, not just by technology companies.
Wilf, let's go to you next.
Yeah, I guess my ask is that as employers, and many of us are working for or with employers or our employers, is that we keep a very open mind with regard to people's desire to work for longer. I'll give a couple of specific thoughts. The insurance industry, so much of the work we're doing now involves technology. The claims assessors of all those roles have disappeared because we've got artificial intelligence being used to assess claims nowadays. The work that was being done in call centers, it's now being done by chatbots. And so, of course, we're hiring lots and lots of young people who can do all this technical work. One of the assumptions we were making is that this new work would not be attractive to some of the older people who still wanted to work, who were largely being displaced. With one example where someone had been answering calls for 12 years, standard questions over and over again. Chatbot was coming along. She was asked to give the answers to the common questions to the IBM data scientist, who would then program the chatbot to make her redundant. Within a few months, she decided she could do the job of the data scientist and started training chatbots, the most unlikely of people. Now she's training other staff to train data scientists. And these things challenged our paradigm that it's only the young folks that want to do this kind of work. And secondly, it's related to Catherine's point. And again, for many of us as employers, our rules are set up to discourage people from managing in anything other than a three-phase life. This struck me. One lady, been with us about 10 years, senior position. I learned she'd resigned, mid-50s, and inquired why. And she said, well, my mother's really, really sick. I've got to stop work. I've got to retire to take care of my mother who's terminally ill. And I knew she's going to find it really hard. She probably doesn't need to be taking care of her mother for that much longer, but if she retires, she might find it really hard to come back. And so I said, oh, well, you don't need to retire. Just at some point, you'll be ready to come back. Tell us when you're ready to come back. But that's just one case. And I realized it's not institutionalized that people can feel comfortable saying, I need a break. They often feel they need to get a sabbatical. They need to change jobs. To do what really counts in their lives, they need to switch. So I guess my ask to employers is perhaps we look at our practices a little more carefully and adapt them to people's desire to take more breaks and to go beyond three-phase life.
Catherine, you want to follow up on that quickly?
Well, you're singing to the choir. Yeah. and the flexible work arrangements, which by and large don't exist among employers, but the idea of moving from full-time to part-time or working in a different capacity or taking a sabbatical or telecommuting arrangements, these aren't just for these aren't just for older workers who are transitioning into retirement. This can help attract and retain younger workers who are thinking about starting families. Now that we know, as I learned from Jim, 100's too low. I think we need to be planning for even beyond 100. We're all going to need to go back to school at some point and refresh our skills. And these types of employment practices can really help facilitate that.
And Jim?
Well, I would urge governments and other institutions to have education programs for young people who still probably think that their retirement age will be, and as Catherine rightly pointed out, sort of the mindset is, whatever public policy is, that they are going to be working much longer, therefore they have to save longer, they have to look at their lives in an age of automation with a completely different view to the trajectory that their parents and grandparents had. So government has to play a role not just in funding science and working out finances, but also in educating the young generation that this whole life that we've come to see as a paradigm is changing and is about to change. And we're not boiling frogs here. This is happening really, really very quickly. Just to give you an example of the speed of technological change, which is going to apply to medicine as well. 10 years ago, last week, the front cover of Forbes magazine said, is there anything that can stop Nokia? Well, we know what stopped Nokia. And it's going to be the same with medicine in the next 10 years. When we look back in 10 years' time, we'll see such dramatic improvements and changes that we won't believe what's happened to the world.
So my ask is that everyone begin to embed questions about aging and longevity in their discussions in all of their businesses, in their policy environments, and in every other environment, because every institution across every society in the world will have to change in response to both changing demography and the prospect of longer lives. Join me in thanking our terrific panel, Wilf and Jim and Catherine and Ofer. Thanks so much for being with us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us.